I feel horrible about how I feel about my wife, and I don't know what to do with all of this. Apologies in advance. This may turn into an emotional rant.
This year, we celebrated our 12th anniversary, and it was, without a doubt, the worst one we've ever had. For years, I've talked to her about how I feel, about how it seems like we're more roommates than a married couple, how I no longer feel like her husband or the father of her children. And I wonder, why do I feel this way? Well, every time I try to show her affection, whether it's a surprise hug, a random kiss, or just coming up behind her and wrapping my arms around her while telling her I love her, what I get in return is rejection. She physically pushes me away or responds verbally, asking me to stop. And I can't help but wonder, why wouldn't a wife want affection from her husband? This isn't an isolated incident, not by a long shot. It's been an ongoing issue, something I've been mentioning to her for years. And when I get firm about it, when I explain how much it hurts to feel unwanted, to feel like she's rejecting me and making me feel unloved, her behavior changes for a little while. But in the end, everything goes back to the same. It's a cycle that I can't escape. In our day-to-day interactions, even in other more mundane conversations, it always seems like she thinks the worst of me. She makes comments in front of our marriage counselor, like when it comes to financial decisions, saying that I will just do whatever I want. That broke me. I've never made a financial decision without consulting her first. And when she said that in therapy, I was absolutely crushed. That's when I realized just how little she thought of me. When it comes to intimacy, I have to beg her for any kind of contact. And when she finally agrees, I feel like I'm forcing myself on her, like she's only doing it to shut me up, to make me stop insisting. I've stopped being able to enjoy those moments, to share something so intimate and close with her. I can't even finish when we're together anymore. Everything has become empty. So I decided to stop trying to show any affection to her. No more hugs, no more kisses, no more initiating sex. I stopped jumping up to greet her with excitement when she came home. I stopped telling her about my day. I started to distance myself emotionally, spending more time out of the house with friends, doing things that made me happy. And I was okay, really. I spent more time with my son and daughter, and things between us were fine. She said she noticed me pulling away, but she never said anything about it, never made any effort to reach out emotionally or even talk about what was going on. Nothing. Then I got a second job that forces me to interact with a lot of different women. Some of them give me more attention than my wife does. I can't help but feel attracted to them, more than I feel attracted to my wife. I'm not acting on those feelings, but I can't deny that they're there. Finally, during one of our therapy sessions, it came out. I admitted that I no longer feel the same, that I've lost that spark, that excitement to be around her. I find myself wanting to be with other people more than I want to be around her. After therapy, we had another talk, and I felt horrible telling her how I felt. The words just came out. I couldn't stop them. I didn't yell because I wasn't angry, just sad. I felt devastated, like I was breaking her heart, even though I knew she loved me and didn't want this to end. But I, honestly, felt emotionally checked out, like I couldn't give more. It was at that moment when, somehow, everything changed. She started showing me affection constantly. Suddenly, she stopped sitting on the other side of the couch, ignoring me, and began snuggling up to me, seeking my arms, wanting to be held. She was the one initiating kisses, the one initiating sex. She became that fun, spontaneous, happy girl I had fallen in love with years ago. She wasn't that miserable person anymore who ruined every social interaction with her refusal to participate in anything, or that woman who always complained when my family wanted to do something. Now she was the first one to suggest plans, sometimes more than I did. She was laughing again, enjoying herself again, being everything I had once wanted her to be. But now I feel worse, because I still feel the same. My mind, although aware of her efforts, can't help but think that this is just a phase, that at some point everything will go back to the way it was. And deep down, I still feel like it's too late for me emotionally. This doesn't feel like a loving marriage anymore. I no longer feel like the man I want to be for her. I feel like I'm with a girl who really wants to be with me, but I'm staying just so I don't hurt her, so I don't cause her pain. And it's not fair to her. I know it's not all bad. She's an amazing mother, a great partner. She takes care of the house, has a great job, and has supported me all these years. And that's what makes me feel even guiltier because she doesn't deserve this. She doesn't deserve it. I don't get it. I don't know what to do. Should I give up? Is there a way to fall back in love with her? I don't know if it's me who's wrong or if I'm just going crazy. Thanks to everyone for your comments and suggestions. I truly appreciate them, and they've given me a lot to think about. After receiving so much support and hearing various opinions, I decided that the best thing to do was to sit down with my girlfriend and talk about everything I had been holding inside. I didn't want to continue living with this weight on me, and I felt that if I wanted our relationship to improve, we needed to be completely honest with each other, without holding anything back. Her first reaction was somewhat unexpected. She seemed surprised, even a little defensive. I realized she wasn't expecting to talk about these things, that maybe she hadn't seen the problems as clearly as I did. At first, she tried to justify herself, to explain why things had gotten to this point, and while I understood, I also felt like that wasn't helping me heal. However, I decided to be patient and listen to her too. I knew that these kinds of conversations weren't easy for either of us. I calmly explained how I felt, how distant we had become, how difficult it was for me to feel loved and connected to her. I talked about the times I tried to get closer, to show her affection, only to be rejected. Sometimes subtly, other times more directly. I didn't say it with anger or reproach, only with sadness, because it was something that was truly affecting me. I told her how it had been chipping away at my self-esteem, how it made me feel invisible, like everything I did didn't matter to her. When I finished, she was silent for a few moments. She looked me in the eyes, as if she were processing everything I had just said. At first, I thought she wasn't going to say anything, but after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. She told me she never meant to make me feel that way, that she hadn't realized how much her lack of response had been affecting me. Apparently, she had been so focused on her own problems and on what she thought was happening in the relationship that she hadn't noticed how I was feeling. It was then that she started to open up a little more. She explained that, for her, the lack of affection didn't come from a lack of love, but from a kind of emotional exhaustion. She said she felt trapped in a daily routine and sometimes simply didn't have the energy to be as emotionally present as I expected. She confessed that she had feared that if she showed vulnerability, I might see it as a weakness, or that I would pull away even more, and that had created an emotional barrier between us. It was a tough moment, but also a liberating one. Understanding her perspective, even though it didn't solve everything, allowed me to see things from another angle. Not everything was as black and white as I had thought. We both realized that we had been trapped in our own bubbles of insecurities and fears, not realizing that the other person was also suffering. We talked for hours that night. As the conversation progressed, the tensions seemed to fade away little by little. She asked me what she could do to improve things, and I told her that the first thing we needed was to work on trusting each other more, being more open about what we felt. We needed to regain that connection we once had, the one where we both felt comfortable showing our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. One of the most important things from that conversation was that we agreed we needed to be more aware of our own personal spaces, but without letting that pull us further apart. We knew we needed time for ourselves, but we also understood that didn't mean disconnecting emotionally. Instead of seeing our individual needs as a threat to the relationship, we decided that we needed to respect each other's space, while also finding ways to continue cultivating closeness. It was a balance that, of course, wouldn't be easy to achieve, but at least now we agreed that it was something worth fighting for. Throughout the conversation, she also asked me if I thought there was still hope for us, if I saw any way we could reconnect the way we used to. Although it was hard to admit, I told her I didn't know. I didn't know if what I felt in that moment would change or if things would ever be like they were before, but I also explained that I was willing to try, that I didn't want to give up, that I cared enough to keep fighting for our relationship. At the end of the night, although not everything was resolved, there was a sense of relief. There was no longer so much tension in the air, and for the first time in a long while, we both felt like we were on the same page, willing to work together on whatever it took to improve our relationship. She hugged me, something that hadn't happened in a long time, and while I knew that not everything would be fixed right away, at least I felt like we were starting to take steps in the right direction. What struck me the most was how, after everything, we both came to the conclusion that love isn't just about happy moments, about enjoying each other's company, but also about understanding and accepting the difficulties, being patient and compassionate when things aren't going well. That night, although we didn't have all the answers, we understood that the first step toward the solution was to be honest with ourselves and with each other. That conversation left me thinking about what I really want and need from a relationship, and also about what I'm willing to give. No one has the magic formula for love, but I know that, at least, we're both willing to try. After the deep conversation we had last week, we both realized that we couldn't move forward without setting some clear boundaries in our relationship. It wasn't about putting up walls to push each other away, but rather agreeing on certain rules and agreements that would help us understand each other better, respect each other more, and above all, feel secure in what we are both willing to give and receive. We both agreed that the lack of open communication had been one of the main causes of our disconnection. There were things that one of us felt but didn't say, out of fear of causing conflicts, and those things had accumulated until we reached a point where we couldn't ignore them anymore. We now knew that we couldn't continue like this, without talking about what made us uncomfortable, without being transparent with each other. So, we sat down and made a list of things each of us felt were important to feel comfortable and respected in the relationship. We started with the activities that made us feel good as a couple, the ones we really enjoyed doing together. Simple things like going for a walk, watching a movie on Sunday afternoons, or taking a little weekend getaway. There were many activities that, although simple, we had always enjoyed, but had stopped doing because of lack of time or simply because we had forgotten how important they were to both of us. It was amazing how, by making this list, we realized we had so much in common in terms of the things that made us feel happy and connected. This was a good first step because it gave us something concrete to start working on. Then we moved on to talk about boundaries, and this was much more difficult. There were many things we needed to clarify. We started with boundaries related to friendships and interactions with other people. We both knew that sometimes the excessive time spent on other relationships, whether with friends, coworkers, or even people of the opposite sex, could lead to insecurities or misunderstandings. My girlfriend explained to me that, although she trusted me, she sometimes felt jealous or uncomfortable when I spent time with certain friends, especially those with whom I had a closer connection. On my side, I told her how I felt when I didn't get enough attention from her, how frustrated I became seeing that she didn't seem interested in the things I was doing, and how that led me to seek emotional connection outside the relationship. We decided that it would be essential to maintain open communication about our friendships, especially when they could be potentially problematic. If either of us felt uncomfortable about an external relationship, we would discuss it immediately, without hiding anything. We also agreed not to make assumptions or judgments without talking about things first. Instead of keeping things inside and letting them grow, we would address them at the right moment, calmly, without accusations. Another important point was managing jealousy. I acknowledged that, recently, I had started to feel insecure in some aspects, especially when she didn't show much interest in me. I told her that my own jealousy, although not directed toward other people, had been aimed at her indifference, and that made me feel unwanted. She, on her part, admitted that sometimes she had been so absorbed in her own world and responsibilities that she hadn't even realized how her attitudes were affecting me. From there, we agreed that we needed to be much more conscious of how our actions could affect the other person, even if we didn't have bad intentions. The other key issue was personal space. We both knew that, for the relationship to work, we needed time alone, outside of the couple and family dynamics. I, for example, needed time for myself, to disconnect, do things I enjoyed, and recharge. She also expressed that she needed that space, but sometimes didn't know how to ask for it without me misinterpreting it. We agreed that it would be crucial to respect those moments of solitude without feeling rejected because of them. Additionally, we agreed that whenever either of us needed that space, we would communicate it immediately to avoid misunderstandings. The last important point we discussed was how we would handle disagreements. We both knew that we wouldn't always agree on everything, but we understood that the way we handle those differences would make the difference in our relationship. We decided that, instead of keeping quiet and letting frustrations build up, when something bothered us, we would say it in the moment, calmly, without shouting or reproaches. We both understood that disagreements didn't have to lead to separation, but if we didn't handle them with respect and communication, they could. We committed to not letting little things turn into big problems. By the end of the conversation, I felt we were in a much better place. Although we hadn't resolved everything, at least we were taking concrete steps to improve our relationship. We both had a clearer vision of what we needed and what we expected from each other. The conversation was difficult, but also liberating. It allowed us to see things from a more mature and understanding perspective. After this talk, the following days were different. Although the old dynamics didn't disappear immediately, I felt there was a tangible change. We often took a moment to ask how the other was feeling, to check if everything was okay, and that alone was an improvement. Setting these boundaries didn't mean putting up barriers, but rather creating a safe space for both of us to be ourselves within the relationship. I'm aware that this won't be easy, that there will be ups and downs, but at least now we have a solid foundation to build on. We know that the most important thing is to keep talking, to continue being honest, and to keep respecting our own boundaries and each other's. If we can do this, I believe we can overcome the difficulties we've faced and find a way forward together. In the end, what I want is for our relationship to be a place where we both can be happy, without feeling like we're sacrificing who we are or what we need in order to be together. After a few weeks of trying to implement the agreements we had made, we realized that, despite our efforts, things weren't improving as much as we had hoped. Although we tried to be more open and communicative, something was still missing. The truth was, we felt like we were taking steps forward, but then taking 2 steps back. We weren't progressing as quickly as we wanted, and we both started to feel that, even though we loved each other, maybe we weren't equipped with the right tools to face the difficulties that continued to arise. That's when we decided we needed external help, something that would give us clear guidance on how to improve our relationship and strengthen our communication. Reluctantly, but knowing it was for the best, we signed up for a couple of therapy sessions. I, in particular, had some fears about the idea of going to therapy. Not because I didn't believe in its effectiveness, but because I felt like we were failing as a couple, and that made me feel vulnerable, almost as if we were admitting we didn't know how to handle our own difficulties. She was also a bit nervous. She wasn't sure what to expect, how the session would unfold, or if it would really help us. But we both knew that if we wanted to improve our relationship, we needed a space where we could speak openly, without fear of being judged, and learn to resolve problems in a more constructive way. The first day of therapy was a little awkward. We sat in the room with the therapist, a very kind and patient woman, but we were both tense. It was hard to start talking, not because we didn't want to, but because it felt like all of our insecurities and accumulated frustrations were seeping into our words. I felt that if I spoke too much, I might sound like I was blaming her for everything. And she, on her part, seemed unsure of where to begin, perhaps fearing that what she said would be misunderstood. However, the therapist was very understanding, gently guiding us through the conversation and helping us focus on what we really wanted to achieve. The first thing she did was ask us about our expectations for therapy, which made us reflect. At first, we both said we just wanted to understand each other better, improve our communication, and find ways to avoid falling into the same behavioral patterns that had made us feel distant. But as the session progressed, we realized that the real reason we were there was deeper. We didn't just want to improve communication. We wanted to reconnect in a way that would make us feel like we used to, like when we first started dating and everything was easier. The therapist also helped us realize something important. We were both using the lack of communication as a way to protect ourselves. I didn't feel loved, and instead of expressing my emotions openly, I would withdraw and immerse myself in my own world. She, on her part, was dealing with a sense of emotional exhaustion, and instead of talking about her own fears and insecurities, she kept them to herself, which, in turn, pushed me further away. Therapy showed us how this cycle of distance was only making things worse, and that the key was to be vulnerable and honest, even when it wasn't easy. One of the exercises we did was practicing active listening. The therapist asked one of us to talk for a few minutes without interruption, while the other just listened, trying to understand what the other was really feeling and needing. At first, it was difficult. My first reaction was to try to justify my feelings or give advice, but the therapist made me realize that the important thing wasn't finding immediate solutions, but truly listening. When it was my turn to speak, my girlfriend looked at me intently, without interrupting. And that made me feel that, although not everything was resolved, at least I was being listened to in a genuine way. Through this exercise, we both learned that real communication isn't always about speaking, but about being present for the other person, listening with an open heart. The following sessions were a little easier. We began to feel more comfortable talking about our deepest and most vulnerable feelings. And we started identifying the behavioral patterns that had been affecting us. We learned, for example, that most of our arguments weren't really about what was bothering us, but about how we felt interpreting each other's actions. It's easy to assume that the other person knows what you're feeling, but the truth is, they often don't. Each of us has a different way of processing emotions, and that can create a lot of misunderstandings. One of the most revealing moments of therapy came when the therapist talked to us about unspoken expectations. She explained that often couples create expectations in their minds without telling the other person what they really need. I used to expect my girlfriend to know what made me feel good without having to say it, and she expected the same from me. The key was learning to express those needs clearly, without assuming that the other person knows. At first, the progress was small, almost imperceptible, but over time, we began to apply what we had learned in therapy to our daily lives. Instead of letting frustration and resentment build up, we now try to talk before things accumulate. We also started doing little things to show the other person that we care, like spending more time together, doing something unexpected to surprise each other, or simply asking how we feel in a more genuine way. Not everything is resolved, of course. There are still days when we feel exhausted or when the old dynamics seem to resurface, but at least now we have tools to handle them in a more mature and conscious way. Couples therapy hasn't been a magical solution, but it has given us a new perspective on how to build a stronger and healthier relationship. So although we're still in the process, I feel like we're on the right track. Now we understand our own fears and expectations better, and that allows us to get closer. I'm grateful we made the decision to go to therapy, because although it hasn't been easy, it's been a crucial step toward a stronger and more mature relationship. Thank you all for your continued support and for being there throughout this entire process. Your messages, your advice, and the simple fact that I knew someone was listening gave me strength, even in the toughest moments. Today, however, I have news that is not easy to share, neither for me nor for her. The situation has changed, and after much reflection, we have come to a painful but necessary conclusion. It has been several months since we began working on our relationship, looking for ways to improve our communication, set boundaries, and rekindle the connection that had been lost over time. Along the way, we went through couples therapy, spoke more than we had in the past few years, and tried to understand each other's needs. In many ways, we learned valuable things, and the therapy sessions gave us tools that, at first, we thought would be the ultimate solution to our problems. But over time, we realized that the progress wasn't as significant as we had hoped. Old behavioral patterns kept resurfacing, and although we both wanted things to work, something inside of us began to fade. As the days went by, the reality became clearer. We realized that we weren't where we wanted to be emotionally. On one hand, we both had a deep love and mutual respect, but we also knew that love alone isn't enough to maintain a healthy relationship. The connection that once existed between us was no longer the same. We had reached a point where, despite our efforts, our emotions no longer aligned. She felt it, I felt it, and in the end, we both understood that, although we tried to save something we once had, the relationship was no longer functioning in the way we both needed. Deciding to end things was not easy. We spent many nights thinking about everything we had shared, the happy moments, the memories, the life we had built. There was much doubt, much indecision, because we were both afraid of the unknown, afraid of the pain that inevitably comes with the end of something that once was beautiful. But in the end, the conversation we needed to have came. We sat facing each other, and with a lump in our throats, we began to speak about what we truly felt. It was a mix of sadness, resignation, and, in a sense, relief. We knew that staying together wouldn't make us happier, and that, although we loved each other, we had changed so much as individuals that we could no longer offer what the other needed to be happy. It was a long and painful dialogue, but it was also a conversation filled with understanding and respect. Despite everything we had been through, there was no place for resentment. We acknowledged that the circumstances had changed us both in ways we hadn't anticipated. The relationship that had once been our foundation, our strength, had now become an emotional burden. We had grown, but not in the same direction. What hurt the most was seeing how both of us realized that our relationship, as it was no longer going to work. Sometimes it's easier to hold on to what you know, even if that thing is no longer what you need. But true love isn't enough to sustain something that no longer exists in the way it used to. And although at first it was a terrifying thought, we finally understood that letting go was the healthiest thing for both of us. After the conversation, we spent some time in silence, processing everything we had said. It was a moment of clarity. We both understood that although our paths were parting, we had to move forward. We hugged each other for the last time, not with sadness, but with the sense that we were doing the right thing, even though it hurt deeply. It was a goodbye to what we had been, but also a recognition that we were ready to move on, each on our own. This is not a goodbye full of hatred or resentment, because the last thing I want is for her to think that I don't value her. I deeply respect her as a person, as a mother, as a friend, and I always will. It's just that at this point, we were no longer the couple we once dreamed of being. And although staying together out of obligation or fear of being alone was an option, we chose not to do that. Life has more to offer, and we both need to find our own path to happiness. What remains now is the learning. What I learned from this relationship, the lessons I've taken with me that will help me become a better person in the future. There is no resentment, just gratitude for everything we shared. Now, although I don't know exactly what the future holds, I'm ready to move forward. I don't want to miss the opportunity to grow more, to be better, and to find my own path. We said goodbye, not with bitterness, but with the understanding that this was the ending we both needed. Although the pain of the breakup is great, so is the hope that, with time, we will both find what we truly seek. Maybe one day our paths will cross again, but for now, we need to be apart to heal, to rediscover ourselves, and to move forward with our lives. And although this update may not be what everyone expected, I think that by sharing it, I can be honest with you about what is really happening. Sometimes love is not enough, and that's okay. The important thing is to learn, move forward, and find what truly makes us happy.